This election was different. It probably felt different to you. Maybe your friends and family have stopped talking to you. In this video, I want to talk about how to win those people back, why this election was different, and how evangelical Christianity's role in electing Donald Trump was a big factor. I'll also talk about if Christianity is a strong foundation for political beliefs and where do we go from here. Please note I won't hold back, but before we go further, I request that you put aside any labels that you attach to your identity so you understand that I'm not attacking you and there's nothing you need to protect. All I ask is that you try to understand my perspective. I made this mostly for Trump supporters to help them understand what it might be like in their friends' and family's shoes, and also to just spout my opinions on this past election and about evangelical Christianity. First, I want to talk about what this election has been like for someone on the left, in case you still have friends or family who seem distant or are not communicating with you, or if you're just open to new perspectives. Now, one thing I should mention is there have definitely been a lot of left-wing media outlets that are more talking head videos, some of the newer media, who basically gave a lot of people on the left a lot of false hope about Kamala Harris's chances. They said things like she was going to, even take Iowa and Ohio and Florida and Texas and Alaska. And that was just never realistic. More reputable outlets basically let you know what was going on. They said that she was underperforming Biden in 2020, and basically because Biden barely won, it didn't look good for her. And because he didn't have any state they had a huge blowout in, basically that meant that Donald Trump was probably going to take all the swing states and win the election. And so that was a big letdown for some people that were kind of trapped in those news outlets. And also there was kind of this, will he, won't he be convicted? Will he be held accountable for his crimes? Or will he be the president again and be able to get away with everything and have successfully lived a life taking whatever he wants, whenever he wants, with no regards to others, and just this incredibly nasty, toxic person. And just they'll have all their dreams come true while the rest of us struggle to get by and have to play by rules just like anyone else without that level of wealth and power. This wasn't an election about politics. It was about common decency, integrity, and ethical standards, especially for those on the left. And to understand what it was like for them, let's talk about who Trump really is. Now, I tried to put together a comprehensive list here, but I burned out part of the way through just because it just felt like there was something new each day. So this isn't by means a full list, but I do want to get through some of these things in no particular order. First of all, he had his rise to power in politics by being a birther and claiming Obama was born in Kenya, so there was that. He started out strong for sure. And then there's also Trump admitting that he makes things up to scare people into voting for him. Do his supporters even bat an eye? No. He said that on Fox News, of all places. Nobody seemed to care. And by the way, I have a link for that video and a lot of other things in the description below. And then there was, of course, January 6, 2021, the attack on the Capitol. Trump in the private dining room off of the Oval Office That's where he sat as he watched the violence play out on the news. His aides tried to get him to make a strong statement to call off the violence, but he didn't. He kept watching it play out. He then tweeted about his vice president not having the courage to do the right thing as he was watching this violence. Now, anyone should have been able to see that he put a target with that tweet around his vice president. And that did indeed cause his supporters to threaten to drag Vice President Mike Pence through the streets, saying he betrayed the U.S., and they started chanting, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence." And that was very predictable. It was 3 hours and 7 minutes from when Donald Trump egged on his supporters on stage, watched the whole thing played out, watched as law enforcement got a handle on the situation, and then made a statement asking people to go home, as if he was against the violence the whole time. His aides and his daughter, who were in the room with him, have all testified about exactly what happened. You voted to put this wannabe dictator, mentally adolescent, entitled, spoiled brat back in power. I ask you, what if Obama lost to Romney in 2012? And he tried to stay in power by saying the election was rigged against him. The thing is, Donald Trump has a history of this, saying that things are rigged when they weren't, including during the Iowa primary, where he said that Ted Cruz rigged the whole thing. Of course, there's no evidence of that, and there's no evidence of any mass voter fraud in 2020. And it kept getting shot down by everyone, all the judges, including ones that he appointed as well. Now, if you weren't a partisan Republican, then it should have been pretty clear, pretty obvious that this was just an entitled person throwing the world's longest tantrum. Conveniently, no widespread voter fraud happened this election. Everything's good. I guess the deep state wasn't working hard enough. And if you still can't accept the obvious fact that he lost in 2020, there's also this. When talking with Dr. Phil last year, Trump said that if Jesus came down and counted all the votes in California, he would have won that state as well. A state that he lost by 29%. Let that sink in. Do you still believe his lies? How can you? He lied to you. This was just about his ego. People died because of these lies, and all you did was stroke his ego and buy into his lies. Don't be upset for me. Don't be upset at me for telling you this. Be upset at the guy who lied to you. And then, of course, there was the whole thing with him being, surrounded by a lot of corrupt people who went to jail. That wasn't great. He fought the investigation into him holding on to documents after he left the White House for whatever reason. 4 out of 44 of his cabinet members, those were the only ones that endorsed President Trump in the last election. A lot of them came out and said he was terrible, he was a wannabe dictator, he was easy to manipulate. Well, duh. Trump also held a fundraiser for veterans, which he used nearly $3 million of that illegally for his political campaign. He was literally stealing from veterans. That certainly falls in line with all of his other views about them, calling them suckers and losers, and everything he said about John McCain. Thankfully, he was ordered to pay that money back to charities. Of course, he fought it the whole way. And then there's him fawning over dictators. And, I ask you if you remember when a bunch of left-wing actors did that during George W. Bush's presidency. How you felt about that. If not, just watch Team America World Police for a refresher. Parties change. Of course, he was a serial cheater. He has literally dozens of sexual assault allegations against him: groping, kissing without consent, rape, including his former wife, looking under women's skirts, and walking in on naked teenage pageant contestants. This is definitely a common theme with him. There's also the Access Hollywood tape, where he basically said that he felt entitled to grab women by the pussy. And also, earlier in that video, a lot of people forget, he was bragging about how he almost hit it off with a married woman. And then there is the E. Jean Carroll deposition, where he confessed on video to being a rapist. You know, like he doesn't hold things back sometimes. And, you know, if you don't believe that, I've linked that video as well in the description. So, you voted for a rapist. Trump was found guilty on 34 counts of falsified business records to pay off a porn star. This is the guy that evangelicals are in love with, obviously. Also, this marks a first: having a former or sitting president convicted of a felony, let alone 34. Great job, Republicans, for paving a way forward to having no standards for politicians. Falsifying business records. That's just something this guy does casually, because he has no sense of right versus wrong. And this is the guy you support. Any one of these things alone should have been a deal breaker for anyone with even the slightest sense of morality. But there's more. During the campaign last year, he also mused about someone shooting up people in the news media. You know, that was great. And then when someone killed a CEO, he called support for him a sickness. So I wonder if that applies to him as well. Trump has also talked about tossing reporters in jail and stripping major television networks of their broadcast licenses if they cover him in a way that displeases him. Even conservative media outlets should be worried. This is not something you tolerate for a second if right-leaning media was the major target. Possibly using the military against the left is also something he suggested. Again, you would not be okay if a Democrat did that. And in an effort to line his pockets with even more wealth, more money, and to appeal to evangelical Christians, oddly enough, Trump started selling his own Bible, where he does exactly what the Bible warns against: taking away from it or adding to it. Of course, evangelicals just give him a blind pass on that because he's Trump. I really believe if he said he's a second coming of Christ, evangelicals would believe it, because that's what they treat him like. No other person could get away with all this nonsense. It's like he's cast some spell on evangelical Christians. And he's not even a Christian. This is Trump on God here. I don't like to have to ask for forgiveness. And I am good. When asked by pollster Frank Luntz if he'd ever asked God for forgiveness, he responded, "I'm not sure I have. I don't breed God into that picture. I don't." Trump is incapable of putting anything above himself, and it's baffling why anyone would think otherwise based on all of his actions and all the things he has said. They wouldn't if any other politician said that. If Joe Biden said that, they'd definitely question his identity as a Christian right away with those statements alone. And let's just be clear, Trump is definitely no Reagan with everything he said with Ukraine and Russia and NATO. He said about Ukraine and Russia invading it, that Russia can do whatever the hell they want. That is very far from Reagan, okay? So, again, Republican Party has changed quite a bit. So basically, I think he's a narcissist with daddy issues, He's an energy vampire that has fatigued a lot of us, including Republicans, with all of his drama. He is the Ralph Wiggum of politicians. I don't think staring at the sun with his naked eye during an eclipse and suggesting drinking bleach could cure COVID helped much. Or, every day screaming into social media in all caps like an idiot, all the while telling us all the time what a genius he is. In fact, he's claimed he's the smartest man ever, smarter than even Albert Einstein, as his supporters cheered on that claim, not saying much for their intelligence. So if we had a friend who did that, who bragged about their intelligence all the time, what a genius they are, and nobody knows this and that and whatever like they do, well, that likely wouldn't last long, and we would also see it for what it really is: a stupid person who is deeply insecure about their lack of intelligence. And for whatever reason, we just keep rewarding him and elevating him and making excuses for him and sane-washing his incoherent ramblings. Also of note, upsetting someone you disagree with doesn't mean that you're right about something. I'm speaking to the trolls on the right. Someone who might see me being upset and dismayed and think that if Trump is doing that to the other side, then he must be doing something right. You can do that through corruption and being a creep. Also, it's very surprising and reality-breaking to see conservatives, especially evangelicals, give up their values to support this disgusting person. If I told you 20 years ago that you'd vote for Donald Trump, you'd laugh in my face. That sleazy, arrogant real estate guy? If I told you you'd vote for a rapist, and then again for him after he tried to stay in power after he lost an election, again, you'd laugh at that. I'd never do that. Your standards have changed. And basically how I see it, that we seem to have high standards for Democrats and low standards for Republicans. But I feel like what that really does is it just kind of makes Democrats the, more adults in the room. And one bad thing from like a Democrat, okay, that's bad. Unlimited bad things from Trump, okay, sure, why not? You would never tolerate Trump's behavior from another adult, and probably not even a child. So I ask you, what would be the line for you? Was this the line 20 years ago? All this is just a fraction of the terrible things he's done. If you understand these things about Trump, and please feel free to check out my sources in the description, then you can hopefully understand what it's like for the left to see their friends and family on the right support such a monster. And it's funny because I remember, definitely much smaller things would get people in trouble, and politicians, like Romney's comment about binders full of women, or Howard Dean's basically excited squeal on the campaign trail, that ended his campaign. And we've just completely gone the other direction, or at least Republicans have. So how did we get here? How did things get this far? How did you lose sight of everything you used to care about? Well, for one, I think that echo chambers play a big role. I think Citizens United had a big hand to play in this. Now with unlimited political donations and super PACs, which make us more divided, more partisan, and things just got angrier and louder and uglier. And then Fox News used to be the really big media outlet on the right. And then eventually they got some competition, like from One American News Network and Newsmax. And suddenly they started to try to out-conservative each other for viewership, out-partisan each other, out-conspiracy theory each other, out crazy each other. And that eventually led to competing for who supports Trump the most. And things got nastier, and basically that's kind of how the whole Dominion thing happened. Um, you know, they didn't actually believe in the claims Trump was making, but, we'll get to that later. Now, conservative media is mainstream media. I think another factor was basically a lot of churches validated Trump supporters' beliefs because that's what they wanted to hear the most. And, they knew that. Despite most Americans really disliking Trump, he ran against an incredibly disliked politician in 2016, Hillary Clinton, who also had a sense of entitlement, and people were just tired of her and wanted to try out the new person, and that's how he became the president. Also, people aren't that great with differentiating an honest straight shooter with an unhinged narcissist, and that's unfortunate. And with the last election, people were just as consistent as usual. If the economy is bad or perceived to be bad, they vote out the incumbent party, blaming them for all their woes. Now we know that they'll do that even if it means voting for the person who tried to stay in power when he lost the very last presidential election. I can't believe I'm actually saying that. That's not something I ever thought would happen in the US. And with conservative media getting even crazier and now completely willing to overlook Trump's stupid tweets, his scandals, his crimes, it really started to become clear that what it meant to be conservative was to support Trump. Your very identity and association with your tribe is at risk of crumbling apart if you say anything bad about Trump. That's how he essentially became infallible and this savior figure in the minds of conservatives, especially, weirdly enough, evangelicals who adore the man. And then, of course, there are some Republicans who aren't huge fans of Trump, or might downright despise him, who are single-issue voters. They are more than willing to compromise their values, their integrity, their religious morals for the sake of a particular issue. Let's address the issues that come up the most often, what I hear the most from those people, to see if it was worth it. So, first of all, there's the economy. Now, of course, MAGA is going to support him anyway. Big money man, make me money, essentially. And then there were independents who, as I addressed before, things get bad. It's time to change the party. But, also of note, he is not fiscally responsible, and that used to be a conservative value. During his presidency, he added $8.4 trillion in the national debt. And yes, most of that had nothing to do with COVID relief. People say they did better under Trump without realizing that inflation wasn't just happening in the US, but around the world as a result of the COVID pandemic. The US actually had a good recovery compared to other countries. And then there's tariffs, what he's threatening to do to the US. The conservative Cato Institute said there's no economic case for new tariffs. The conservative Wall Street Journal reported on and cited studies that his proposals would cost 684,000 jobs, and it would cost a typical household $1,700 a year. And they didn't even factor in domestic goods getting more expensive or the effects of retaliatory tariffs from other countries. This is exactly what we don't need right now. But that's what you got, and that's your gift to everyone else. And then he talked a lot, of course, about trans people. He put out a lot of political commercials trying to scare you. Trans people are scary, they're weird. He said, your boy leaves for school, comes back a girl. That's not true. That's not how that works. They're people just like you who want to live their lives how they want to, not hurting anyone or forcing people to be like them. Leave them alone, and hopefully one day you can even have love for them. Although I know some of you do. Also, of all the things going on in the world, what strange priorities to focus on sports and bathrooms. Things that you probably wouldn't give much thought to if it wasn't for the media. If you're an evangelical Christian, I'd think you'd rather include them in more things and try to convert them instead of being freaked out by them, obsessed about them, and trying to push them away. And then there is the whole, illegals are out to get you thing. And basically there was a lot of fear-mongering around that. That's not based in reality. Seeing a clip does not mean, this is representative of the whole. And that's, I think, what a lot of people miss here. And so basically, he wasn't even talking about deporting those people, but all undocumented immigrants are about 4% of the US population. Now, think about what that will do to the economy. A lot of them are hard workers, and if he has his way, then they would just be gone. Okay? And the weird thing is, I know people who are friendly with other immigrants, and some of them do yard work for them. I know people that have some undocumented workers do yard work for them, and they're very friendly to them. And then I guess they just have this other side of just they go home and fill out their ballot and yes, deport this person. And it's just so weird to me. And I kind of ask you, again, evangelical Christians, what do you really think Jesus would want you to do in this situation? Just if you had to guess, if you had to put your politics aside, I think it should be pretty clear. And then there's abortion. This is going to be a big one. So I'll say straight out, it's not murder if it's not a person. And it's not a person if it doesn't even have a single brain cell, which it doesn't at conception. And even if a clump of brain cells just suddenly fell out of your ear one day and onto the floor, that's not a person either. It's a process, and it takes time, and it's not an on or off switch. I hope you see that. That's why I'm comfortable leaving that decision with whoever is pregnant. I hope that makes sense. What would happen if you forced people to have unwanted pregnancies is more suffering and more poverty. That doesn't sound like a very Christian thing to do. And so let's talk about what the Bible says about abortion. Nothing. But I know you're doubting that, so let's look at the common reasons given for the Bible condemning abortion, which it really should have done a better job with if you think that God thinks that it's murder, and because it definitely was happening back then as well. All you really had to say was, life begins here, don't end it for any reason. It really is that simple. So what they often quote here in the Bible are, I'll list a few things here. Psalm 139:13. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. Okay, now notice what this doesn't say. Life begins at conception. Also, it doesn't say at what point, or if any, this person is, knitted completely. And so basically you could take it in a lot of different ways. If you're knitting something together, do you have your quilt after the first few strains, are woven together? I don't know knitting. And I think you would say no. Is it finished when it's half finished? Maybe some people would say yes. Probably most people would say no. Is it when you completely finish? knitting it together, that is kind of up in the air. And this 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 verse doesn't say that. And then there's Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. So this isn't, of course, talking to the general population, but this is just kind of repeating the same thing, that, you were formed in the womb, not that you were, formed perfectly at conception or anything like that. And also the knowing you, well, an all-knowing God would have known you, thousands of years before you were born. So I don't understand where you get life begins at conception there. And then other verses I found were just verses that, came out against, murder is bad. But, of course, you're kind of assuming your conclusion to begin with, if you don't recognize that, if you're making that argument. And these are the ones that I found that from basically pro-life websites. So these were not filtered through anything else. And these are the ones that I've heard the most. These are probably the ones that you've heard the most. Okay? So the Bible does not say anything against abortion. Also, the Bible mentions people dying at their last breath and breathing life into people. So you could say that life begins at first breath. And honestly, that would be just as flimsy of a case for being okay with abortion. And then I'm going to read Numbers 5:11 to 31. This is the test for an unfaithful wife. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, so that another man has sexual relations with her, and this is hidden from her husband, and her impurity is undetected, since there's no witness against her, and she has not been caught in the act, and if feelings of jealousy come over her husband, and he suspects his wife, and she is impure, or if he is jealous and suspects her even though she is not impure, then he is to take his wife to the priest. He must also take an offering of 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour on her behalf. He must not pour olive oil on it or put incense on it, because it is a grain offering for jealousy, a reminder offering to draw attention to wrongdoing. The priest shall bring her and have her stand before the Lord. Then he shall take some holy water in a clay jar and put some dust from the tabernacle floor into the water. After the priest has had the woman stand before the Lord, he shall loosen her hair and place her hands the reminder offering, the grain offering for jealousy, while he himself holds the bitter water that brings a curse. Then the priest shall put the woman under oath and say to her, if no other man has had sexual relations with you, and you have not gone astray and become impure while married to your husband, may this bitter water that brings a curse not harm you. But if you've gone astray while married to your husband, and you have made yourself impure by having sexual relations with a man other than your husband, here the priest is to put the woman under this curse. May the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. May this water that brings a curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells or your womb miscarries. Then the woman is to say, Amen, so be it. This is an abortion. So in short, I don't think the single-issue Republican voters have anything to gain by supporting Trump. Because I've been talking about it anyway, I think it's time to have the big talk. The reason you might have clicked on this video, I want to talk about how evangelical Christianity plays a role in all this. All the politics on the right. Honestly, I think it's simple. I think people's politics trumps their religion, and as part of their evangelical identity, It's kind of given that you're a Trump supporter. Go to some churches in America and you'll hear the pastor talk about politics almost as much as he talks about Jesus. In fact, you might hear him say the word woke more than he mentions Jesus. They know their audience and what they really want to hear. It all plays into this victim complex. And it works the other way around. They kind of believe that if you suffer, Jesus will reward you. The more you suffer, the better. Of course, physically suffering isn't great, so it's mostly mentally suffering and believing everyone is out to get you. And this plays into all the conspiracy theories that are already there to make evangelical Christianity work in the first place, a lot of which surround young earth creationism. And this victim mentality and conspiracy theories, and these conspiracy theories and anti-science rhetoric show up in their politics. It feeds each other, even if the core values of the right and Christianity don't always align. But is their foundation of Christianity solid? Let's talk about free will and how reality really works. Either everything is random happening around us, making up at our reality as we know it, or it's not. And we call that not part determinism, which is what you have to believe in, given an all-knowing, all-powerful God. There's no way around that. However, with either outcome, free will, however you want to think of it, does not exist in either scenario. And if free will has to exist for your beliefs to work, then they don't work. They're wrong. When people talk about how Adam and Eve used their free will to disobey God, well, this doesn't work. God knew how things would play out before he even created them. Meaning that's what he wanted, despite the Bible saying God doesn't want any of that. He doesn't want anyone to perish. He detests sin. Also, you can't say sin was needed because that implies God couldn't achieve his goals without sin, meaning he's not all-powerful, all-knowing. If God necessarily had the knowledge and the power to create things, so Adam and Eve and their descendants didn't disobey God, then let's compare that to a world where he created Adam and Eve to disobey him, which again is what he would necessarily have done, being all-knowing and all-powerful. Neither scenario has more free will than the other. There's no difference in the free will versus robots slider. And I know how pastors and apologists like to talk about free will and robots, thinking just saying those words solves this problem. So basically, sin and the punishment for sin are nonsensical and don't work given this framework. This alone shows that Christianity is a false religion. Even if you're a Calvinist, because the Bible does clearly show that God doesn't know everything that's going to happen, as he is often surprised or disappointed or regretful about the outcome of certain events. And then there are just glaring contradictions in the Bible. Now, realistically, they don't really matter to evangelicals because they can just justify them however they want to, no matter how terrible the excuses are. But they should matter to them, and they would if they were in some other religion, for example. Now, there are a lot of contradictions. I spent a lot of time combing through the good ones and the bad ones and the ones that are somewhere in the middle. But my favorite are the ones that simply revolve around numerical quantities of things, like the number of arms-bearing men in Judah and Israel, the number of Syrian charioteers slain by David, the number of stalls in Solomon's stables, the number of baths in the molten sea. When it comes to these contradictions about numbers in the Bible, all that is ever given up and can be is that they're simply scribal errors. Well, first of all, a contradiction is a contradiction. An error is an error. If the Bible has contradictions, if the Bible has errors, it's not inerrant. It is not God-inspired. And the Bible also makes a lot of claims that aren't scientific, very unscientific, and I wanted to pull aside this one in particular because I feel like this one is kind of a gem here. This is Deuteronomy 22:13-21. If a man takes a wife and, after sleeping with her, dislikes her and slanders her and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman, but when I approached her, I did not find proof of her virginity, then the young woman's father and mother shall bring to the town elders at the gate proof that she was a virgin. Her father will say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage to this man, but he dislikes her. Now he has slandered her and said, I did not find your daughter to be a virgin. But here is the proof of my daughter's virginity. Then her parents shall display the cloth before the elders of the town, and the elders shall take the man and punish him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the young woman's father, because this man has given an Israelite virgin a bad name. She shall continue to be his wife. He must not divorce her as long as he lives. If, however, the charge is true, and no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her town shall stone her to death. She has done an outrageous thing in Israel by being promiscuous while still in her father's house. You must purge the evil from among you. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about that. Basically, if the woman cannot provide proof that she is a virgin, basically, that she doesn't bleed when having sex with a man, then she is to be stoned to death. And this law, basically, these laws and regulations are basically what God gave to Moses. Okay, so this is coming from God. Now, God, all-knowing, apparently doesn't understand the female body. Okay? Now, it doesn't quite work that way. Most women don't bleed their first time, and their hymen can tear when there's no sexual penetration at all. Okay? And so this doesn't make any sense given an all-knowing God here. And this alone should make you realize that. And then a lot of evangelical Christians are convinced heavily by prophecies, and you'll hear a lot of pastors go on and on about there are so many great prophecies. So many great prophecies. There really are just so many great prophecies. So many. And I want to challenge you on that. If they're, actually good, if you can verify them, if they, have some substance behind them. And so this list comes from a YouTuber called Apologia. And basically, he made a list of, a little checklist of if they are basically good prophecies or not by having some very simple standards. And I want to read those off to you. 1, prophecy is made clearly and demonstrably prior to the events predicted. So that's kind of important, because if it, happens in the verse before, or if it happens afterwards, it's not really a good prophecy. 2, it is intended to be a prediction. So, yeah, if it's not, that's also kind of a problem. 3, it's a non-mundane claim. That's also important. If I prophesy to, I'll eat something today, that's nothing wonderful. That's not convincing. 4, answerable only by a single, clear, verifiable occurrence. Okay, it can't be, a regular, repeatable thing. Okay, that's pretty obvious. 5, it's not open to interpretation. Okay, there's There's no vagueness behind it. And 6, it's not something people are actively attempting to fulfill. For example, if I was solid on all 5 of these, but basically somebody tried to make it happen, like if I said like I would get, like I don't know, some garlic bread put on my head tomorrow at 3 p.m., then somebody does that, especially who is, aware of that. Is that a prophecy? No. And basically, I think when you look at prophecies that you think are amazing, they don't really hold up to these. And I definitely challenge you on that for any prophecies you think are pretty fantastic. And also, I see prophecy as a reason to not believe in the Christian God, because not only are there some pretty meager prophecies that you wouldn't need to have if you're all-knowing and all-powerful, you especially know what will convince people, but there are failed prophecies as well. The big one that I think we all know is that the world will end before Jesus' generation. Said that signs of the end of the world would be fulfilled before his generation. That was not true. Okay, and I know there have been lots of justifications for it, but you're going out of your way to, try to make it into something else instead of just taking it for what was said. Okay, there's no extra context you can read into that. 2, Damascus will cease to be inhabited. It still is. 3, Nebuchadnezzar will conquer Egypt. He tried, but he didn't. And so these should also show you that the Bible is not reliable. So why bring this up at all? Well, not only is your support for Trump at odds with your Christianity, but your belief in Christianity is at odds with reality. The foundation of your support for Trump is, let's just say, less than solid. Also, evangelical Christians kind of have the secret they don't want you to know. They kind of sort of want the world to end. Why? Because if the world ends, then, many of them believe, they will be raptured before that happens. Why do they want that? Because if they're raptured, then they can skip the messy and not so fun process of dying. Their lives at the cost of many. They look forward to the end of the world. I know this because I used to be part of it. And I can tell you that I don't want any politician to be part of this, to want this, or to try to appeal to people who want the world to end. That's one reason I don't support Republicans, because a significant part of their base have that mindset. And of course, Trump plays into that as well. With that information, what have you gained and what have you lost by supporting Trump? You have not gained a conservative ally. Trump has said that he's for universal health care, that he's very pro-choice. He has praised Hillary Clinton, saying she would make a good president. He said that he identifies as more of a Democrat and that the economy does better under Democrats. And he has donated to Democrats, including, funny enough, Kamala Harris, when she was the Attorney General of California. He also donated money to Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and several other Democrats. Now, despite what he says, that's not something you should do if you believe Democrats are destroying the country or making things worse. Also, politics will be worse now, at least for quite a while. They now know you have no standards. For those of you who didn't like Trump but voted for him anyway for whatever reason, you have lowered the bar for what politicians can get away with. Republicans have fully embraced conspiracy theories and every nutty thing under the sun, and people will never look at evangelical Christianity the same way, again, with their support for a wannabe dictator, a rapist, and of course, all the other things. His cabinet picks are not of people who have any qualifications for the job, but of his billionaire friends and corrupt individuals he can count on to fall in line. If he really cared about appointing qualified people to their respective positions, he wouldn't go with the chief executive of the WWE for the education secretary. That's not something you do if you care about the country or education. It's just a gift to them, a title, for a big contributor of his campaign. He's not better than other politicians, he's worse. You will not benefit from this administration. If you don't believe me now, time will tell on that. And, of course, recently has said that, or suggested that he might use military force to take a hold of Greenland and Canada. So for those keeping track of things, Putin and dictators, good, smart for all that they do. NATO bad, Ukraine bad, Greenland and Canada potential war. Probably not, but you never know with Trump. He's dumb. And of course, this means Ukraine will probably have to give up some of its territory now to Russia. Yeah, Trump is definitely not Reagan, and the Republican Party has changed quite a bit. And then there are tariffs. Like I mentioned, you will likely be paying thousands of dollars more each year if his tariffs become a reality. Everyone is advising him not to do this, but remember, he thinks he's smarter than Einstein. And if he thinks he's smarter than Einstein, he certainly thinks he's smarter than economists as well. And this has been one thing Trump has wanted to happen for decades. It's one of the things he's been consistent about. So what do you have to lose here? A lot of money. So overall, I think you have lost your moral standing and your credibility and gained nothing for it. And then there's still the ultimate F you to the country and everyone in the world that another Donald Trump presidency has to offer us all. And for that, we have to go once again to the conspiracy theory defeater, science. First, we have to understand what the scientific method is. It is a process for establishing or modifying scientific knowledge through observation, experimentation, and analysis. It's pretty amazing, and the reason we're living such comfortable lives. And it's pretty great at figuring out how things work. And one of those things is the climate. And what is currently causing the Earth to warm? It's burning fossil fuels. Of course, I'm talking about climate change. I'm sure you all know what it is. One thing I can assure you it's not is some kind of Democrat socialist plot or Chinese hoax, as Trump says it is, or another vast conspiracy theory. We all know the Earth is getting warmer. We know more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps heat. We know there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know this is coming from burning fossil fuels because of this form of carbon's specific isotopes. All that would be enough. Plus, we've seen an incredibly sharp increase in the global temperature since the Industrial Revolution, and models of the global temperature don't make any sense unless we factor in the effect of greenhouse gases, at which point the data lines up. So oil companies, they knew that climate change was real, and their own research modeled the changes in the temperature caused by burning fossil fuels remarkably well. And what they do, they lied about it and called other models predicting warming speculative and bad science. Sound familiar? They targeted lesser educated men and low-income women with disinformation, trying to make anyone sounding the alarm about global warming look hysterical. And as far back as the 50s, they were using the same PR firms as the tobacco industry to lie to the public. Again, I have links to all these things in the description. If you fancy yourself a climate skeptic, that's probably where your false information about climate change originated from. So how does this play into evangelical Christianity? Well, not only do they not believe the climate scientists, because scientists bad and conspiracy theories good, they wouldn't even care if they thought that it was true. Why would you care about it if you thought you were going to be raptured soon? Definitely, at least by some time in your life, because your generation is special, and because all the signs point to the end being near. Something Christians have said and believed for thousands of years. And how does this play into another Trump presidency? Right now, we have a climate emergency and need to take immediate action to prevent the worst effects of climate change. There are certain tipping points that, once we pass, we can't go back. Trump is in bed with big oil and is possibly too stupid to see the threat. He also won't listen to people who have dedicated their lives to studying the climate because he thinks he's smarter than everyone. One of the not-so-great consequences of having a president who's a delusional narcissist. The U.S. will forever be poorer because it didn't take action sooner, playing catch-up and spending more than it had to each year in damage mitigation alone, caused by climate change. While everything I've been saying might sound like it's all doom and gloom, there's no need to worry. Why? Not only does worrying accomplish nothing, but I believe everything is the way it is because it couldn't have been otherwise. In our lives, we constantly think about what could have been, but the truth is, if anything in your life was different, it wouldn't be you. It would be a different person with different lived experiences. And if you don't believe that, then why not think of how things could have been worse in your life instead of better? Appreciate all that you have now. I found practicing gratitude when you desire to do so the least is helpful with changing your perspective on things. This all ties in with radical acceptance. You can't change the past, so why not embrace it and learn from it and become the best version of yourself that you can be? Even if Trump screws things up big time, maybe things will actually be better for you 4 years from now if you invest heavily in improving your life, becoming more knowledgeable, healthier, improving your relationships, and getting even closer to accomplishing any goals you set for yourself. Of course, if we want to learn from our mistakes and make things better in our political system, how do we do that? For the right-leaning individuals out there, don't double down on false beliefs. Do the hard thing. If you're wrong about something or you did someone wrong, figure out how you can make amends with the people you hurt and strive to do better next time. Reach out to your left-leaning friends and let them know you value them. Listen to them. Let them know you've changed your perspective, if hopefully this video helped you see how Trump and Republicans and conservative media took advantage of you. Also, no one is perfect or will have the exact same views as you, but at least have some standards for politicians. Please do that again, and have the same standards for all politicians of any party. And don't just think of what they might be. List them. Include certain deal breakers you might have used to have before Trump entered the picture, like, for example, being a narcissist, being a rapist, or being convicted of 34 felony counts of falsified business records by a jury of your peers. And for the left-leaning individuals out there, you already have high standards and a healthy appreciation and expectation of certain ethical standards in politicians, but don't wait for perfection. No one is going to agree with you on 100% of the issues. Vote for the person who's most in line with your beliefs and has an actual chance of winning, which would include that person actually being on the ballot in all the states. And rich people, stop concerning yourselves with short-term financial gains. They don't make you one bit happier. They just make you look needy. Most studies I've found, and I'm sure you've come across them as well, show that happiness associated with income levels, levels off way below $1 million, so you're not doing yourself any favors. You know this is unsustainable, and when everything goes under, you're not coming out of this unscathed. You benefit long-term from doing the right thing and contributing more to building a better society. You're losing nothing by doing that. And As far as everyone's concerned, please vote in every election. Stay active in your community. Be engaged locally. Try to understand other perspectives instead of protecting whatever identity you've given yourself. And to that end, try to limit what you identify as, what labels you put on yourself. Being open to new ideas is a good thing. And, I can speak from experience here to the evangelicals out there whose pastor might tell them being open is bad. I want to tell you that being open to new ideas is not the same as adopting those ideas. Evaluate things critically without figuring out how to poke holes in an argument when someone is talking so that you can protect your identity. You have nothing to lose by listening. What about how we consume news? Set boundaries on when and how much news you consume to avoid unnecessary stress, and because, well, I personally know some people who are addicted to watching the news, waiting for every news alert that comes their way. Most people often will use excuses, as addicts are inclined to do, saying, I just want to stay informed, when most news isn't new news, especially in regards to watching big news networks constantly. Which brings me to another point. Reading your news is usually going to be better than watching your news. It's going to be less sensational, less addictive, and more informative. Also, get your news from reputable sources. I know the less reputable ones will say that you really can't trust them, but they're just saying that for their own benefit, their own profits, so that you stick with them. If you rely on a news network that is based around a single personality, or an outlet that engages in a lot of speculation, conspiracy theories, anger, emotional manipulation, and the like, then it's time to get your news from somewhere else. Cut them out. They are making you dumber. They are knowingly lying to you for a profit. They are grifters, just like Fox News is. What they say on air is very different from what they say in private, and we know this from the Dominion lawsuit against Fox News, where we saw in Fox News anchors' private messages, they thought the allegations of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election, presidential election, were crazy. But they went on air and said the exact opposite. That document is also in a link in the description if you want to read that. Also, they don't like Trump, but they know their audience loves him, so they have to pretend they do as well. And I don't think other conservative networks are different. They are educated people who are trying to make a profit at any cost, even if it means lying. Trump constantly harasses these people, these anchors, supposedly his people, when they don't praise him enough, and I assure you they're not a fan of that or of him. They're actors and should be seen as such. And after all of that, if you still watch these news networks, if you can even call them that, I wonder why. I see some possible reasons. One is you just don't care to look into it because you're afraid it will affect this kind of identity you've given yourself. Or perhaps you don't care if it's true because you're just addicted to watching them, regardless. Like someone who's just glued to their phone, to their TikTok app. Or it's like a sacred routine to you that you just cannot be disturbed. You don't like anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, even if that means living a lie. Also, this is not a news outlet. I'm just a person spouting my beliefs and what I've learned throughout this process. Although I do include my sources, and that is something that is definitely important in whatever news you consume, which again is easier when you read the news, online for example, from a reputable source, instead of watching your news. It's also important to diversify your sources. Get your news from outlets, reputable ones, that provide different perspectives. You don't want other people being stuck in an echo chamber, and the same should apply to you. Being wrong feels a lot like being right, and the only way you should be confident about your views is if you know all sides of any issue, and by that I don't mean having an opposing opinion filtered through your news outlet of choice, I mean you need to get it through the source. Please also know that what your particular partisan propaganda news network shows you about the other side is not representative of the whole. Just assume that they are fear-mongering if you're going to watch that. Lastly, please don't get your news through random social media posts. Please don't. Next, I want to talk about how we can improve the whole election process. First, we need to overturn Citizens United to restrict corporate spending and influence in elections. This is a no-brainer. We need to implement independent redistricting commissions to prevent gerrymandering and ensure fair representation. We need to eliminate the filibuster to promote more efficient and effective governance. We need ranked choice voting to help us get out of this two-party lesser of two evils nightmare. Ranked choice voting just means your vote isn't wasted if you want to support another candidate instead. That's all. If you know what it's like to rank your favorite movies, you know how to rank your favorite candidates. We need to strengthen whistleblower protection laws to promote accountability and transparency. We need to implement term limits for the Supreme Court. We need to get rid of the Electoral College. People want this. It wasn't made to be the fairest system. It was simply a compromise to give the slave states more power. This was also before parties were a thing. And you would never think it would be a good idea for any other nation to implement a similar system where more people have more voting power than others based on where they live. For example, if you live in California or Texas, your vote is counted as essentially 0.85 people compared to the whole population, while someone in Wyoming is apparently worth 3.2 people. You know that's not right, so stop it with the games. Right now, it just comes down to a little more than a handful of swing states. The rest don't matter. We need to change that. That will also help with people being more engaged with voting when they feel like their vote actually matters. On that same page, we need to have a national primary. Just like how the Electoral College is stupid for very obvious reasons, so is having essentially 3 states decide who a party's nominee is. Again, we can get everyone involved equally with voting. The people in only 3 states deciding a nominee, and the people in only 7 states deciding the president is messed up. You know it is. Let's have these votes be like voting for anyone else on your ballot. Outside of election reforms, we also need to promote critical thinking and media literacy, like how to identify biases and recognize propaganda so we can better combat disinformation. We need comprehensive civic education in schools, emphasizing practical skills such as voting, activism, and community engagement. We need to offer civic education programs and resources for adults, too. And we need to place more restrictions on who can run for office. If you are a rapist or you've been convicted of certain other crimes, or you try to stay in power when someone else was elected, for example, then you shouldn't be allowed to run for anything. Not only is this obvious, and sadly now needed, but this would help prevent people from doing these things in the future with this new precedent that you helped create. And there are many more things we need to do. This is just a small sampling of them. I certainly have more controversial ideas as well, but those are for future videos. With all that, there's just one more thing I want to say. Life is guaranteed to have periods of light and darkness, and this will certainly be a trying time, but we can come out of it, hopefully having learned something from this experience. I'm still optimistic about the future. Even if we've lost our way, I'm sure we will find it again. If you appreciate this video or got anything out of it, please let me know. Your support goes a long way. Please share this video with anyone who would benefit from a little validation at this time, or your Trump-supporting friends and family who need to hear this. and consider subscribing if you like this format and how I tackle difficult issues. And if you notice, I don't really hold back. I prefer straight talk, and that's what I have to offer you. I'm only going to post when I feel like something really needs to be said so that I don't clog up your feed or waste your time. And with that, I'll see you later. Urgh.